I'll go for seniority. I call the Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Age before beauty. Age before beauty. Thank you very much,
A winning
Mr. Speaker.
smile.
Mr. Speaker, if the government wanted to reinvent the wheel, why does it not choose to reinvent the wheel properly? What they have done in this, the first time they have mentioned housing affordability in 5 budgets, they are choosing to send it to a truncated select committee process. And why are they doing that when that is one of the things that offends people the most? Not having access to due process around submissions and being able to be heard. We have heard from them tonight that this is a complex issue. Then why truncate the process? Why make sure that as few people as possible can get to submit on this? So if they are going to reinvent the wheel because they have scrapped and repealed every constructive piece of effort made by the previous Labor government to address housing affordability, because we knew it was a problem in 2007, and now it is 36% worse under their watch, 36% worse under the national government's watch, Mr. Speaker, then why are they not allowing a decent run at submissions for submitters on this bill? Mr. Speaker, all I can conclude is that the Minister in whose name this bill is likes urgency. He likes to look as if there's a lot of activity happening. We've seen him almost destroy ACC in that process, and now they're having to correct that. But time is needed because this legislation is half-baked. If I quote, for example, about from John Armstrong in the Herald, and when he's talking about National's housing affordability package, he says, "Package? What package? No wonder National avoided overselling the contents of their plan to make housing more affordable. The plan looks more like a rough first draft," unquote. A rough first draft. So if they're going to take this rough first draft, Mr. Speaker, to Select Committee, the very least they could do is allow a decent period of time for the Select Committee to polish it, to turn it into something halfway useful, instead of this limp-wristed, lily-livered piece of nonsense that allows the government to talk with local authorities, Auckland in particular, but other territorial authorities as they choose by order in council, because they haven't worked out what they mean. They haven't worked out whether or not Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Nelson and Queenstown are still the most expensive places in the country to buy a house, which is why the shared equity program was put into Nelson and Queenstown and those 3 major centres under my watch, but axed by the incoming government, because they cannot conceive of housing affordability, despite Maggie Barry's protestations, being a critical issue in more places around the country than just Auckland. It is a critical issue. The Minister who does not know that there was a woman with 5 children living in a garage in his own electorate wants to rush this through the Select Committee. Surely he could have the courtesy, pay people the courtesy of making sure that they had the opportunity to submit properly. And I come back to the point I made before in the earlier debate, Mr. Speaker, and that is around the RMA provisions, and it's around consenting, and it's around the processes that councils have to engage in order to ensure that affordable houses that are built are fit for purpose, are sound, are of good quality, and will work on the sections that they are intended to be built upon. And so, in order to make those things happen, there may be some room to speed up processes, but let's have a proper look at it. Let's have people come to the Select Committee and and represent the concerns that they might have under closer scrutiny. It is typical of this minister, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that things under his watch do not get close scrutiny. When he had the local government portfolio, he blew up the figures in that portfolio as well, so he had to be shifted out of that. I mentioned ACC already to my colleagues, but I mentioned that already, Mr. Speaker. Every portfolio he touches, he seems to cause some kind of explosion in it that requires it to be, him to be relieved of it. But this one is of the same ilk. And if the minister doesn't even know what is going on in terms of homelessness in his own electorate, how can he be trusted to set down legislation that is to provide affordable housing, hopefully in more places than just Auckland? Why not Wellington, Christchurch, Nelson and Queenstown, and Tauranga, which has now been added to the list of the top most expensive places in the country to buy a house? People who are renting properties in Nelson are renting at exorbitant rates because the property prices are so high. The rental market is linked in with that. If the minister is going to address housing affordability, let him do it comprehensively, not with this limp-wristed piece of nonsense that is not only because I voted for it. If the minister had been in the House earlier, he would have heard that we're voting for it because we actually care about housing affordability, and we would like to take a sow's ear and turn it into a silk purse. So if we can improve on the legislation, it would be good to be able to do that. In the space of 2 months, Mr. Speaker, in the 2-month period that this legislation is going to a select committee, it is, as John Armstrong said, so much a rough first draft that most of the drafting of the legislation is going to have to happen in the select committee. It's going to have to happen in the select committee, and therefore it requires more time. We'll get a bodgy job of housing affordability made by a minister who has this ripping and busting approach to everything he touches, and that is not appropriate when we are looking at one of the most critical crises in our country. Mike Sabin was right earlier. Buying one's own home is part of the Kiwi dream. It is part of the Kiwi dream. He was absolutely right about that. We all agree about that. We all know, except perhaps for some, that there is a housing crisis. 2 months is insufficient time to do justice to this critical issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's a very simple reason